Hey everybody, my name is AJ Shunker. I'm the CEO of Everlaw. We're a discovery and litigation platform. So I'll try to tell you a little bit about some of the interesting new things in computer science that are making their way into legal tech. I also have a PhD in computer science, so if I'm wrong about anything here, at least I'll be wrong in a really opinionated way. This is a kind of scattershot, right? In 10 minutes, what can you really convey? So at a high level, we'll try to get into something interesting. The first thing here is the maturing cloud, right? This doesn't sound new. The cloud's been around for a while. Actually hasn't been around for that long. Amazon kind of formally released AWS in 2006, which is when the iPhone was released. And it's a lot easier to buy an iPhone than it is to move all your data to the cloud. So the cloud is actually at a slower adoption curve in some sense than kind of mobile devices. But we're getting to a point now where cloud adoption is reaching a threshold where interesting things are happening, certainly in legal tech. The first observation here is everyone has a cloud strategy. Everyone we talk to, financial institutions, big corporations, governments, is thinking about the cloud and has some plan for getting some of the data in the cloud. For some institutions, this is very aggressive. They're putting all the data in the cloud. For other ones, it's a decade-long plan of how they're going to do this. But what's really been interesting here is the change from a question mark around, is this piece of technology, is the cloud going to be useful, to an inevitability. If you have a serious technical footprint in your organization, you are thinking about the cloud. And so I think that is what really heralds the advent of kind of cloud maturity, right? It's a stable piece of technology that everyone recognizes due to the scalability, efficiency, security, all the stuff you get out of the cloud. It's something that you need to incorporate into your technical stack somewhere. So in legal, there's a couple things that are becoming interesting, right? So one of the interesting things is data inventories are going to get easier and easier to manage, right? So in our industry, in litigation and discovery, collections is a painful thing. Collections is that process of gathering all the information for particular custodians that they have, wherever it might be. You're going to go on premises, you're going to plug into file servers, you're going to connect laptops, phones, you name it, and you're going to slurp up all that data and then go through a discovery process. With data moving to the cloud more and more, this becomes actually an easier problem. The data is in the cloud in a technologically accessible way. And so what ends up happening is to get the data with the data being in the cloud, you have to create connectors between a cloud instance and your technology. And so what this basically means is in the future, I think in 5 years, 90+% of what's traditionally a really painful collections process today will be just connecting cloud sources together. You're going to go to your custodians, you're going to just check off a set of boxes of here are the cloud technologies they use, and very quickly you're going to get that data into a legal process. That's actually really exciting, and it's going to make that process much cheaper and easier and a lot faster than it is now. Another thing is resource triage has historically been a really painful part of this kind of boom and bust cycle in legal we see with data, right? So in our industry, we see huge spikes in data usage, right? You're litigating, you suddenly get a huge tranche of data, you need to now scale up to handle that. Or a case suddenly settles, you need to take a ton of data off a system. With historical on-premises systems, that's really painful to do. It's painful to plan for and painful to execute on. With the cloud, that's what it's built to do well, right? So what basically happens here is people's usage of data becomes much, much smoother, and you don't have to worry about triaging your resources and your use cases. For anyone who's been in this industry historically, when you have a big tranche of data, you go to your vendor and you kind of beg them, hey, you have so many servers and so many licenses for your software, please put us in front of the line. We're more important than your other clients. I see some smiles. People know what this is like. It's really painful, and everyone's jockeying for position with a limited scope of resources. With kind of true cloud-native technology, you don't need to do that anymore. The resources are themselves scalable. So you have a huge tranche of data, you can scale up arbitrarily large to handle that. We had a case recently, a massive 70 million document case, and had 16,000 zip files, and the client didn't need to ask us who our other clients were and who else was important to them. In the cloud, we spun up hundreds of servers automatically in parallel to handle this kind of load. So this is going to make, again, the kind of ingestion and incorporation of data easier. I think it also has raises some interesting questions around proportionality. In the discovery process, there's rules around proportionality, right? And one of the parameters for proportionality is access to resources, right? It turns out when resources are easier to access and small teams with cloud availability and artificial intelligence can get through more data easily, it's an interesting question on how that's going to change the notion of what's in the discoverable set of documents when a small team can get access to a lot of data when right now they can't. So I think that's going to be an interesting question over time, how that changes the scope of data we're seeing. And a final point on the cloud here is modern cloud infrastructure gives you an amazing set of security primitives. You can build a secure piece of infrastructure in the cloud that's more secure than any on-premises infrastructure, barring, air-gapped FBI servers. It's incredibly good. The primitives are great. So if you build a really good security system, you can offer better security to your clients than they can with their own systems. And that's really exciting. So the best security will get better, and that's worth noting. Your data will be more secure than it is in the past because these systems are architected for that kind of security. Now, on the flip side, the worst security will get worse. These are security primitives, right? They're not security solutions. Security is a holistic thing. Any firm using the cloud has to build its own security on top of those primitives, and you can do it really badly. So the challenge with the cloud is that it is universally accessible, and if you don't secure your data, the scope of the exposure can be enormous, right? Anyone in the world can kind of access your data if it's not properly secured. So we're going to see this kind of divergence and breadth of security. Better security for discerning folks and worse security for people who aren't paying attention. So do your homework when you're actually looking at these things, and then you can get a lot out of this next generation set of software. So that's the first kind of topic here is the maturing cloud. We're seeing a lot of implications as it pertains to legal. The second one, this is a little more technical, is we are seeing some really exciting advances in language modeling. What the heck am I talking about? This is artificial intelligence as applied to text processing, right? So there's been a lot of hype around AI. It's inevitable. In some ways, it's been really justified. This kind of new set of the availability of computational power, training data, and new algorithms specifically around neural networks has made amazing advances, I would say, in a lot of interesting areas. So things like image processing. So I did some work in this field about a decade ago, and it's night and day what you can do now in terms of object segmentation and classification. It's amazing. And radiology, I think someone mentioned that. Self-driving cars, a decade ago, no one would have thought we're as far along as we are today. Other than unprotected left-hand turns in snow, I mean, it's almost a solved problem. That's amazing. Game playing, I think, we mentioned Go. StarCraft, if you're good at StarCraft, you're not good anymore because the computer will whip your butt. I mean, these are actually hard problems that have been transformed. And the best state-of-the-art computer programs that are way, way better than the best human players 2 years ago are being destroyed by new neural network algorithms. So it's really exciting stuff. Text is a lot harder. Natural language is a lot harder. Language has lots of context and ambiguity, and that makes it a hard problem to analyze. And so while we've reaped these benefits of this kind of modern set of AI algorithms in other areas, we've not seen as many benefits in the area we care about in law, which is a lot of text, a lot of language, a lot of writing, right? This is a hard problem to solve. Historically, classical statistical artificial intelligence has done amazing things by considering text at the individual word level without any context at all. You call this a bag of words model. You literally slice up your documents into individual words and you count them up, and it turns out you can do amazing things with even that bit of information. You can do all kinds of correlations that surpass human abilities in many ways. But that was basically limited. This is the best approach for many years on a lot of tasks. This is as far as we got. And even 5 years ago, this was the state of the art. In the last 2 years, we've seen incredible advances in contextualizing language understanding here. So there's all kinds of interesting research in the last 2 years. In 2018, there was Elmo and Bert. In 2019, there's Ernie and the lesser-known Sesame Street character XLNet. There's been, theme. But anyway, these things have actually broadened our understanding to the phrase and the sentence level context. This sounds really primitive and trivial for humans because we're really good at context, but computers really struggle with this. What we're going to see out of this is improvements in the quality of things like document classification and ranking as these systems improve. I do want to clarify, though, when we talk about them, I think Professor Susskind mentioned this, there's no one is anywhere remotely close to any sense of understanding. None of these algorithms understand anything. And as a computer scientist, I'm very comfortable saying that. So if anyone is promising you something at a human level of understanding, that's just not there. It turns out you just don't need understanding to do really, really powerful things. Sad but true, but really compelling for the state of the art in computer science. the last thing I want to mention here, and this is something that I think doesn't get a lot of attention, is web technologies keep getting better. You all use your computers all the time. Half of you, people with laptops open, I bet 90% of you are in a browser right now, right? And that's okay. If you think about it, what did you use the web for? When in the 90s, maybe you bought something on Amazon in the late 90s, but then in the 2000s, all your email is running through a web browser. That's kind of amazing. And then you can run Office in a web browser. That very sophisticated tools are in a web browser. So it's becoming this operating system replacement. What's next? What haven't we done? There are some things, actually. And one of the things I'm really interested in is, for example, hardware graphics acceleration. So using client GPU hardware, controlling that from a web browser, you can do really cool things. So I don't know if this is going to work here. Let's see. So this is a fluid dynamic simulation in a web browser. And I have a touchscreen laptop. You can see how crazy this is. This is wild stuff being controlled by JavaScript through a browser. You can do amazing, amazing things with visualization. So in a more practical sense, what we're going to see here is something more germane to the law is we can do really interesting visualizations around data, right, that you couldn't do before, right? So this is an example of clustering, right? Clustering is where you kind of put similar documents together. Historically, in the past, that meant we'll have a million document data set. That's too many things to show. I'm going to abstract that with a bunch of big circles, and we kind of zoom in and zoom out and get a high-level overview. With this kind of technology, you don't need to do that anymore, right? You can actually leverage this kind of client-side hardware to do pretty awesome stuff. So I'll show you. This is kind of a live in-browser panning, zooming all the way down to the individual document level of a million document data set in your browser, right? So the ability to actually do this is something that we're going to see more and more of in the legal world. It's pretty awesome. You can do, at a high level, if your job is to discover the truth, to find needles in haystacks, right? You can do that better and better with this kind of technology coming down the pipeline. All right, well, that's my 10 minutes, I think. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much, AJ. Our next speaker is Colin from VLEX.
Thank you. Hi, good morning, everybody. At first, I was really worried about following a PhD computer scientist from Everlaw, but it turns out that this is actually a perfect segue. Just really quickly about VLEX. VLEX is a legal publisher and technology company. It operates globally. We have about 170 people based in places like Barcelona, London, Miami, Ottawa, Canada, where I'm from, and elsewhere. We have a very large collection of common law and very large collection of civil law cases. We serve clients. We have people located in about, I think, a dozen different countries. We have comprehensive law in about 40 different countries and a good collection of primary and secondary law from over 100. That is relevant to this topic because we have to manage that information. So we had built some technology that allows us to manage that more effectively. And as part of our broader strategies, we are interested in unbundling those components for people to build in. So I'm not going to talk anymore about us and what we do, but my presentation about accessible AI for all and rapid prototyping, I'm going to use an example of a solo lawyer. Well, maybe the colors didn't come through quite so well. So this is a non-PhD computer scientist view of AI. It's sort of a stack from the top. The idea of a bleeding edge technology that's sort of something on the buffer line between real and theory, going to what's possible, what we can expect to find 2-3 years down the road. As we work our way down, we're into the leading edge, the applied AI. So here's where people are building patents, not just searching for it like Lex Machina, but actually devising something. They're implementing solutions. They're putting them into technologies. This is where the technology companies live. Companies like VLEX sort of live halfway between that and then the commercial and open source component, where taking the advances of others and combining it with our internal knowledge, we build various functionalities. So most of the legal tech companies that you're aware of that are offering services are spending a lot of time in this space. They're building the solutions. The clients exist a little further down. They're into the productized AI space. So here we think of products like Kira or a lot of e-discovery software where there's training components. The software has incorporated all of the underlying AI, but there's an ability to improve upon it through usage. And then finally, there's just like pure software, AI inside, completely invisible to everybody. What I think we're experiencing right now over the past couple of years, but increasingly into the future, is this idea is that it's increasingly easy to jump in at the middle space for the users. Joy Heathrush mentioned the trend towards organizations building rather than just buying. It has a lot to do with the accessibility and the ease of access to things in the commercial and open source AI. So here I'm talking about things like TensorFlow, talking about things like AWS, unbundling components. I'm talking about things like IBM Watson. As a toolkit, it becomes something that somebody who knows what they're trying to achieve and has underlying data can begin themselves, depending on their access to other things, like scientists who can put it together and so on, can start building. So the other component of this is rapid prototyping. So if you have this sense that I know what I want and I know what I have, how can I get there? So the idea to begin to sort of choose your own adventure, create your own solution, the best way to take that first step is rapid prototyping. So I've laid it out this way. People have different other approaches for it, but ultimately, you want to go through a few stages before you take big leaps into big purchases. And so I'm going to use an example that is, like I say, a small firm approach. First, I want you to meet Sam Harden. Now, a lot of people, especially those on Twitter, know who Sam Harden is. He's a Florida lawyer who spends a lot of his time developing technology tools. So he works for the Florida Justice Technology Project. He's built a lot of stuff on his own. He's a guy who likes to actually create solutions. So Sam's working with us for a few months to help us with some of our larger strategies. But also, we're working through a lot of stuff just for fun with him. So as you can see, a couple days ago, he put out this tweet. This sort of came about because Sam and I had a conversation on Monday to say, hey, what could we do with DocAssemble? Now, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about what DocAssemble is, but it's an open source software that allows people to actually manage and create workflow, among other things. And it's always sort of coming up and down to our attention because of various things that others who are building on top of DocAssemble have done. So last week, for example, a group called Community Lawyer created an integration between DocAssemble and Clio, practice management platform. So in any event, Sam and I had this conversation. We have some underlying pieces. DocAssemble is a useful tool. What could we do? So we went through our prototyping concept. What's a thing that a solo lawyer needs to be able to do? Well, if they're a litigator, they're going to want to actually manage their stuff. Motions, pleadings, things like that. If they're a typical litigator, it's all sitting inside their computer. Maybe it's in Dropbox, maybe it's in SharePoint or Google Drive, but it's largely likely a big mess. And it's probably not as organized as they would like it to be. So from a creation perspective, DocAssemble, we wanted to look at what we could do with that. Trained machine learning models, so things like entity extraction, text extraction, topic extraction, things like that companies like VLX have for our own internal uses and external uses. Companies like Watson have. Professor Susskind talked about sentiment analysis and things like that. There's all kinds of these tools out there that can be plugged in. And finally, domain expertise. Putting together little bits of tech is fun, but there has to be an actual application, a reason to do it. And if you don't have the domain expertise, you don't necessarily know what can be accomplished, and you're not necessarily going to accomplish it well if you don't apply it. Then there's going to be a validation stage. After having sort of tried something, you'll have some insight as to whether you can go a step further, or maybe you want to rethink your idea. And then finally, the persuasion component. All right, I'm willing to go forward with this. Or maybe I'm going to try and get somebody else to help me move forward. So here's what we did. And by we, I mean Sam. My part of the process ended from that 5-minute conversation. Hey, Sam, what do you think we could do with this? And he said, I don't know, let me give it some thought. So Sam built a little knowledge management system. First step is he created through DocAssemble a couple components about categorizing the material. He didn't go deep into this massive taxonomy because this is a prototype stage. This is a chance to use the tech and combine different pieces with available AI. And he said, for my purposes, these are the parts that I care about. So he built a quick little system to upload a document, categorize it, ran the machine learning models against it to pull out some key phrases. And again, we have different models, and people have different models and so on that they can use. AJ just talked about the evolution of a lot of natural language processing. So this component of it is a component that will continuously improve. And as it continuously improves at the high end, going back to my initial stack of where people are at the leading edge and below, what's available for free or commercially available gets better and better. So there's always going to be an improvement here. But anyways, he pulled something out and incorporated some tagging. And then once it's in and tagged both across document type, pleadings, and topics, now he has a searchable tool based around those items. And then he can pull it out and can constantly improve and iterate on this. So, I mean, the guts of what I want to talk about today is really that everything that you hear about AI, we're often hearing about it either from a theoretical, sort of future robots perspective, or from a product perspective of the stuff at the bottom two here on the left, this idea of this software does this company does that, and so on. What I'm saying is we are rapidly entering the position, and companies large and small have the ability to actually design the solutions around their own problems now. Integration is becoming better. It's becoming a priority for many more companies to have what are called APIs, application programming interfaces, so that my machine can talk to your machine. Because there's always going to be a point of something that I want to do for a business, or I want to do for academic purposes, or I want to do for some other purpose, and then there's something that you want to do. And my view of the future of AI in legal is that it's what I call the tinker toy phase, where essentially I have this bucket of spools and spokes and so on, and I want to construct it to make a car that rolls on wheels. You want to construct it to make a windmill. The next person might want to make a trebuchet. And so ultimately, it's going to be people like Sam, it's going to be people like the people at ILTA, Skadden Arps, and others that you heard from who are going to start building this future around us. So that's my view of the future of AI and law. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Colin. Our next speaker is Jason, the founder of Shoebox, who, surprisingly to me, is not using any slides.
Yeah, we'll see if that's a good idea. So hi, my name's Jason Furtado. I founded a company called Shoebox here in Boston. And I thought I'd share a little bit of my journey in legal tech and how it all kind of has occurred and the things that I've learned. Shoebox actually came out of a client perspective of a problem that they felt needed to be solved. So specifically in transactional law, thinking about companies and how they get off the ground and get scaled and funded in a group of entrepreneurs that went through that life cycle and felt like nothing had really changed in how they were being represented. And the underlying vision for Shoebox is to create a command center for the entrepreneur, for the company, to model the company's operations and make it way more efficient. So think workflows to hire employees, grant equity, raise capital, deal with board and stockholders, report on those, generate the documents, deal with the execution of those documents, store those documents, report on those documents for the entire life cycle of the company. Pretty ambitious thought process, brings together lawyers, entrepreneurs, employees, board and stockholders, anyone that's going to interact with the company for the entire life cycle. We had some really great guinea pigs early on that we got to learn a ton from. So a company here in Boston called Toast was one of the first companies on Shoebox. They recently, I think, got valued at like $3 billion. They started on Shoebox with 10 employees, and we got to learn with them, and along with their attorneys, who got the opportunity to use an evolving piece of technology. And one can imagine that when you're leveraging a brand new technology as it's evolving over time, there are some bumps along the road. And as there was a lot of excitement early on from that big national law firm that we were working with, and then as they realized that the technology was not yet perfect, there was less enthusiasm for a period of time. And as the technology caught up, the enthusiasm came back. But with each new piece of technology that we launched, new capabilities, new offerings, there was this same kind of cycle of this expectation that everything was going to be perfect on day one, and this realization that it was going to be a process, and then a little bit of disengagement. As we've evolved and time has passed, I feel like the relationship that we have with some of the attorneys that we've worked with has changed as well, where there's a little bit more of an understanding of what the technology adoption process looks like, and a little bit more collaboration in providing feedback as opposed to just disengagement. And I think that's really important, and I think that's great in general for the practice of law as well as for the adoption of technology. I've always felt like if we're going to build a solution that's at the center of how all these folks interact, then I need to get feedback from all the different folks that are involved. And in recent years, that's actually come more from the first and second and third year associates than the partners, where the partners want to disengage, but their first years and second years don't want to disengage. They want to provide feedback, work with us, make the product better, which is awesome. And I think that that direction is going to yield technology that's better for everyone and end up providing better service to clients and provide tools for attorneys to make their lives better, to do less of the mundane activities. So what I wanted to share was a story that kind of encapsulates this, and specifically around the capital raising process. So think of the Series A, Series B type process that you might hear on TechCrunch. Those activities are pretty complex. There's hundreds of pages of documents, but there are standard forms. And in the past has been a mythical black box that no one should touch because it's too complicated and only the lawyers know how to press the buttons. And not necessarily true, but there is a ton of complexity there, no doubt. As this solution came out there and we were doing earlier this year, we actually did our first full NVCA venture rounds on Shoebox. There was a lot of apprehension from the attorneys and just fear to a certain extent that we were going to blow it up and then they would be blamed. So kind of this expectation setting, relationship management was very important. Turns out technology, at least in our world, is very people-centric, and technology is a facilitation of a process, at least in our world, for workflows. And as we drafted the first set of documents, completely automated through Shoebox, and they went to opposing counsel, naturally what comes back is a whole ton of diffs. So suggestions for changes, some are material, some are not. We've seen a bunch of these transactions and felt the frustration from the entrepreneur around some of the things that come back. So for those of you that don't know, if you're raising capital and you're an entrepreneur, you're going to pay not just for your legal fees, but you're also going to pay for your investors' legal fees. That doesn't necessarily align incentives, as you might expect. So when you're an entrepreneur and you see these diffs going back and forth, and you know that not everything that's in those diffs are actually material, it's very frustrating to know that you're going to be paying for both of those things. Cost is a very sensitive topic. So when these diffs came back, I was like, oh no, we'll see how this goes. This is going to be special. And I was super surprised to see this big law attorney respond back to opposing counsel and say, hey, I don't know if I should have told you this up front. All these documents were generated by a piece of technology. There's nothing, I looked at the diffs, I don't really see a ton of material stuff. Can we just move forward? And surprisingly, the attorney came back and said, oh, I didn't realize that this was technology driven. I don't really have any material issues, which sitting on the sidelines is like, oh my God, what the hell? You just basically said that all the work that you did was not actually material work, but whatever. The deal was closed very, very quickly. Everyone was very happy. We got a ton of feedback on how to improve the forms, but more interestingly to me was that you had a piece of technology sitting in the center of a transaction that actually changed the way that those two individuals interacted. It was different than what they would have done if left to their own devices, and they felt like they were interacting in a Word document, and it was an open-ended negotiation. And instead, it turned to the client is trying to get something done efficiently, and they're just trying to get a transaction done. Are there material issues in this document? So I think turning it around and actually leveraging technology to reframe the problem and thinking about what is the client trying to achieve and how do I as an attorney advise them and guide them to success. Similarly for the investor counsel to make sure that the investor's goals are represented. That is a really good reframing of that particular problem set, and technology happened to help that conversation go in a different direction than it would have otherwise. That's not to say we haven't seen a whole bunch of transactions go the old-fashioned way, but it's nice to see that there's an opportunity, the promise of what technology can achieve and how it can facilitate people interacting in a different way. And more, if I look back at when Shoebox started, most of the folks that I talked to were afraid we were going to get in the way of the relationship. We were going to cause problems and friction. It was all around the negatives, and now the conversation's about how does this get better? How can we work together to create this solution? This makes sense. I don't want to do a lot of this low-level work. I want to help my clients. So the more and more that moves in that direction and folks have an open mind and collaborate with the legal providers, I think that that'll end up with much better outcomes for everyone. So I hope that continues. So thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. Our next speaker is John from Primer. I'll just cue up your slides. Thanks so much.
Good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here learning from all of you, and I wanted to add my voice to that conversation and talk about AI for a little bit. So first, at the risk of covering some well-worn territory, let me quickly frame the problem. So in every field from healthcare to manufacturing and finance, even astronomy, we know is that the volume of data being generated is growing exponentially. And law is not exempt from that, obviously, because we all operate in those same industries. But the number of people we have to interpret and understand that data is, at best, growing linearly. This is true in law in particular, where the number of active attorneys in the US is growing less than 2% annually for the last decade. What this means is that there is a delta between the information that we have and that we are looking at, and that creates an intelligence gap. A gap that can be critical when you're conducting due diligence in a major acquisition, when you're litigating a financial fraud case, drafting the terms of a manufacturing agreement, advising your client on the impact of pending regulatory changes, or any number of other problems faced by lawyers and their clients every day. But we faced challenges like this before. When we had more goods and human labor available to haul or drag them from place to place, we harnessed other animals for the task and then ingeniously strapped those animals to carts rolling on wheels. And when we had more grain than human labor or animal labor could mill, we used that wheel again to create mills powered by the water wheel. And when we had more information and ideas than humans could hold in their heads, we invented writing, and then, of course, the printing press to scale that up to mass communication. In every instance, we've looked to technology to close that gap. And for the modern deluge of data, AI is the equalizer. It can bring structure and meaning to the data in a way a human would. It can identify all the people and places and organizations mentioned in a news article, for instance. It can identify all the players and their affiliations on a sports field. It can identify the speakers, words, and evolving sentiment in a live tech support call. So this is fantastic, sometimes almost magical stuff, but it doesn't close that gap entirely. In fact, it has created a new last mile problem. And we first started talking about last mile problems in the telecommunications industry, but now we use it in terms ranging from commerce, education, public transit, really any situation where the final step of delivery is particularly difficult or inefficient, as it is here. And because for all the advantages we've made in teaching machines to process enormous volumes of complex data, the output is still largely more data. It's lacking in filtering, in synthesis, in narrative. And without communicating that insight back to us humans, it's enormously inefficient. You still need humans, and often really specialized humans, to make sense of it all, to isolate and synthesize the salient information to make it truly useful. Unless, of course, we can teach machines to do that too, to be creative, as we're doing in a field called natural language generation. And the early efforts to do this were pretty terrible. So back in 2016, a researcher trained a neural network on tens of thousands of real recipes and asked it to generate some new ones with what I think are some confusing and unappetizing results. That same year, 2 NYU grads fed a neural network dozens of sci-fi movie scripts and asked it to write a new one with, I think, some hilarious results. They even filmed it. But we've come a long way since then. Earlier this year, researchers at OpenAI announced that they had developed a large-scale language model called GPT-2 that was trained to predict the next word in about 40 gigabytes of internet text. And taking any human input as a starting point, it can continue writing, I think with some pretty startling results. So now we're at the stage where we can begin to solve this last mile problem, where the same machine that can find the entities in that news article can also summarize its contents and deliver to you a meaningful headline. Where machines can not only structure incoming news feeds to identify the key people, the key locations, topics, events, but can also write a summary in natural language that synthesizes this information in the same way that a human would. Now, this technology will only continue to improve. And once you have fully literate machines, machines that can read and write the way you and I do, a world of possibilities open up. Machine-drafted agreements, bots that handle not only client intake, but can also update those clients on demand about their case as it unfolds. Machine-drafted summaries of Byzantine regulatory changes. The list goes on and on. But that future, while more or less inevitable, isn't here yet, at least not in law. So what can us as humans do today? Let me leave you with 3 suggestions. Why 3? Well, because science says that it'll work. So first, welcome your new robot overlords. Did I say overlords? I meant partners. In a study on tumor detection in 2017, the best machines made a correct diagnosis 92.5% of the time. The human doctors in that same study made the correct diagnosis 96.6% of the time. So humans winning. But when the doctors worked with the AI, they together achieved a 99.5% accuracy rate. So embrace the fact that you're better off with these machines. Second, study the technology. You can go to talktotransformer.com to play around with that same GPT-2 model that I mentioned earlier. So learn its limitations, but also appreciate its strengths. The successful legal practitioners of the future will know how best to partner with these literate machines. And third, start thinking about and discussing with others the ethical and even moral implications of this technology. How should it be regulated, if at all? How do we avoid amplifying existing biases? And how can we use this technology to increase access to justice? If you do those 3 things, embrace the change, study the technology, and evaluate its implications, I think you'll be well prepared for a future in which machines will become your co-authors. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, John. Our next speaker is Alma.
Hey everyone, my name is Alma. In 2012, I founded a company called Allegory. I had previously been a litigator at Gibson Dunn in New York and took what I learned there to build a better solution for litigation management. At the time, using Excel was a tech advanced way to manage our litigation, so I thought maybe we could figure out something better. In 2017, I sold Allegory to Integrion, which is a legal process outsourcing company where I was the chief innovation officer until August. So this morning you heard some people talk about the fact that the most difficult challenge in technology is really the adoption and how many great tools there are out there, but people aren't implementing them correctly. And I discovered this firsthand. You can build an amazing technology, you can get it right on so many fronts, but at the end of the day, adoption is where I think we actually need to be pushing harder and harder. It's great to have all of these beautiful bells and whistles, but if nobody's spending the time to ring them, then we're not getting anywhere. So I wanted to go through 10 things, and these are things that I learned, mostly the hard way, transitioning from being a lawyer to an entrepreneur, to all of the work that I've done in the legal tech space. So the first one is security and mobility. And thanks to my husband, who's an actor, we have some movie quotes to help us along the way. So, you know, the hardest challenge we had with adoption, particularly with partners, was people forgetting their password. Because if you forget your password, in that moment when you're ready to use the technology, and then it takes even 5 minutes to get the password, you've moved on to something else. So as you transition into legal practice, I want you to remember that it does take a little bit of effort to actually use these technologies, and the first step is create a password that you'll remember. Because if you want the ability to use technology and be mobile and go places and still be able to do your job, then you need to respect how important it is for things to be secure, and you need to put the effort in there as well. It's not just on the technology companies to hand you a technology where you can just, use it, because they have to think about security as well. The buyer's journey, this was something I wasn't really familiar with before I started selling technology myself. But there's a process to deciding whether technology is going to meet what you actually want to accomplish. So the first step is you really need a plan. It's cool, and I fully promote going out and looking at all these technologies out there, but you really need to stop and think about what your needs are, what problem are you trying to solve. And this is especially important as you start comparing one technology to another. If you don't know what you need out of a technology, then it's going to do you no good to go out there and look at all the bells and whistles that this company has versus another company. This also holds true for comparing yourself to others. So whether you're working at a small firm or a big firm, the technology that works for another firm might not necessarily work for you. So again, just understanding your needs before you go out there. And the last thing is don't be afraid to spend some money on trialing different softwares. It's a very worthwhile investment, because when you're spending money, then the company creating the technology knows that you're invested in evaluating the technology, and the company is more invested in you, because it's not just someone signing up for a free trial who may or may not use it. Almost always our free trials ended up in people not buying because they didn't put the effort in. I mean, honestly, they usually just didn't log in until we put in place structured POCs where they were putting in some money, a small amount of money, but enough to make them pay attention and actually be in this process with us. Value, and you heard this point talked about earlier, compare the technology to your current state, not a perfect state. There is no technology out there that is going to solve all of your needs perfectly. But if you start working with the technology, often the technology providers are more than happy to listen, to take your feedback, and improve upon the technology that they have out there. But again, you have to put the effort in to understand what the technology is doing and look at the way you're currently doing it. Not, can I just go out there and buy an easy button? Oh, you don't have an easy button that'll do it all? Well, then I'm just going to keep doing it the old way. Transparency. So again, put the effort in to understand what is the technology behind the product that you're looking to buy. And if someone can't explain to you what that technology is and what it does and why they built it the way that they did, then that should be a red flag to you. And that leads into bias. So, at its core, AI and machine learning, they're looking at loads of information to then provide guidance and provide predictions for the future, but they're only as good as the information that's going in there. So you should be able to ask technology providers what information they're using to train the system, and you should be mindful of this yourself if you are the one training a system that you've bought. And you need to think about all the permutations and make sure that the information that you're putting in covers all the bases that you might be using the technology to predict going forward. Data input and output. So you should understand up front what's going to be required of you and what information is going to have to be put into the system. A lot of people buy software and think, the Excel example earlier was fantastic. They think, I'll buy Excel and it will just spit out what I need. But most of these systems require work. They require information that is put into the technology. That doesn't mean you have to be the one doing it, but you need a plan for it. Whether it's working with a legal process outsourcer who has people who can input the data, or people on your own team, you need to think about these things before you buy the technology, turn it on, and think that you're just going to push a button and get what you want. On the other side, you need to understand what the output is. If I'm an associate and the output is something that I can't turn over to the partner who has made clear he doesn't want to log into the system, then that may not be helpful to me. What is helpful is if I have a system where I'm willing to use it, the partner may not be, but the output is something that I can take to the partner, because that's a great middle ground where we at least can get technology in the door, even if everyone's not on board with using it themselves. Integrations, this is so key. Understanding what technology you're currently using and whether the technology you're bringing in will talk to those technologies and how those integrations work. Obviously, Clio is a fantastic example of this, where they've built this entire platform around being able to plug in different technologies that you might need for different needs, where another firm may not have those same needs and may not be using all the bells and whistles that you are. But if you don't understand that and you bring in a technology thinking it's just going to stand alone, you're just going to have a pile of 100 technologies that don't talk to one another and really create more work for yourself. Just-in-time learning is something I'm really passionate about, because I think technology should help you do your job better. I think, when we built Allegory, we built it with the idea that a young lawyer, just starting out, should be able to log in and the technology should almost guide them through what they need to do. When I started, if I got a complaint from the partner, I didn't know what to do with that. And so I created a folder on a shared drive called complaint. Turns out that's not really helpful, because that's just one document that I've now put in that folder. So in our technology, we made sure every step of the way we were thinking about the fact that the lawyer may not know what they need to do with this information and how to make very clear the next steps that they needed to take. And that's just-in-time learning, where you're learning as you go rather than being expected to go through training sessions or retreats with your firm where they just overload you with information and then you're expected to remember it for the coming months and years. And finally, user experience. So is the product intuitive for you? The product may be fantastic for litigation technology professionals or for legal process outsourcing companies to use. It may not be built for you. And so you really need to think about not just, is this a great tool and does it do something worthwhile, but is this a tool that's great for me? And is it a tool that I'll use? And the idea should be that when you turn it on, again, nobody's perfect. The tool's not going to be perfect for you, but it should be built with you in mind and something that you can get into and work with technology providers to make it better every day. And then, sorry, I forgot, I had one more, change management. So the way that people think about technology is that they're going to come on board and their productivity is going to go like this. That's very rarely true. more often there's a dip in productivity as you learn the tool and you learn what you need to do to leverage it to become more efficient and effective. And then if you stick with it, your productivity will exceed even your own expectations. But it's so important to stop, communicate your challenges with the technology provider, not assume that, oh, I don't know how to do this thing, I'm out of here. But appreciate that you will need to spend a little time to learn it, to communicate, to learn how to communicate. It doesn't help to tell a technology provider the button's not working. They need more information than that, and you have to be a little bit patient. But by providing that input and sticking with it, you will see those advances, but you really got to put in that effort up front. And that's it. Thanks, guys.